Archaeology gives us a peek into the history of living beings on Earth through the practice of digging up old tombs, ancient cities, and so much more. Thanks to these studies, we now have a better understanding of the people that lived before us. However, many of these discoveries have been quite unsettling. This is especially true for the finds that relate to human nature and how war or traditions led to dark events and rituals. These 5 archaeological discoveries have been described as disturbing, scary, and even baffling. In 1998, a team of experts were excavating tombs near Verona in northern Italy when they came across a puzzling grave. Inside, the remains of a man were found. He was estimated to have been about 50 years old when he passed away. Finding ancient human remains is considered a win in any case of excavation, but this man had something unique and even more amazing to offer. He had a knife for a hand. Obviously, this didn't turn out to be some sort of supernatural robot hybrid. It was just a regular man who lived an average life. The story of the knife is still mind-blowing though, regardless of its rather mundane use. The body was estimated to have been about 1,200 years old, like many in the Acropolis. The body was further investigated and it was revealed that his arm had been crushed in some horrible accident, which made the bones unrepairable. As you can guess, losing a limb during ancient times usually ends in tragedy. A victim would likely pass away at the scene from a lack of blood, or their limb would later become infected. Amazingly, this man suffered neither and miraculously survived this freak accident. In fact, experts believe that he lived for several decades following the loss of his limb. It's unclear exactly when the knife prosthetic was attached, but it didn't include any incisions. It was worn like many prosthetics are today, with a curve wrapping around the nub of the limb and leather straps securing it into place. Researchers have tried to learn more about the man's accident and his arm, and while they can't confirm anything, they speculate that he lost it during battle or as part of a medical procedure. If he lost it as a punishment or from an accident, he likely wouldn't have been cared for in the way that he was. He had to have either been a highly honored man or the guinea pig of a local doctor looking to try something new in order to receive this type of treatment that he did. A dental exam showed that the man's back teeth were worn down significantly more than others, suggesting that he used his mouth when strapping on the knife. There's no way to know what he chose to do with this attachment, as it seems like an odd object to choose. Some researchers think that he was a warrior or perhaps a criminal. Others argue that it's possible that the man had a variety of attachments for different uses. For example, he could have used the knife blade when working outdoors or preparing food, and had other shapes for other duties. In the summer of 2018, Europe endured one of the hottest summers ever, with temperatures reaching record highs. Not only did this heat stir up many issues for local residents, but it played a role in unearthing some of Europe's past. Long-hidden works of architecture and art from thousands of years ago began revealing themselves all over. Among the many unsettling discoveries, a series of sinister warnings along riverbanks became visible and posed perhaps the most unsettling discovery of all. The water in the rivers was usually high enough to cover the bottom of the many stones and boulders that lined the banks. However, when levels started to decline, carved writings could be clearly seen. Archaeologists were immediately on the case and got to work decoding the scripts, which were written in a long since past language that the average person had no chance of understanding. It was found that the words scrawling across the rocks were warnings for future humans. They described severe droughts and famines that occurred in the area. Some of the markings dated back as far as 1417. One stone from Germany said, "If you will again see this stone, you will weep, so shallow the water was in the year 1417. Many of these quotes surrounded the concept of crying or weeping. Another statement from 1616 said, "Who once saw me, he cried, whoever sees me now will cry." Experts explained that drought and famine were not just single standing threats, but they also greatly affected people's harvests. When farmland or hunting ground goes through serious weather issues, they oftentimes don't bounce back. It's possible that these people were plagued with hunger and struggling for years following the original impact of the droughts. Despite modern advances, a drought can still harm residents in the area and can cause certain prices to surge as other services are shut down or delayed. So while the middle class and higher residents of Europe may not have faced as hard of a time as these people from the past, they still felt emotionally moved by the warnings, as the weather could have caused more and more stress. It's obviously also quite heart-wrenching to understand how these people felt as they endured these difficult times. Due to superstition, some people believe that vampires are real and are hiding among us. That doesn't mean that anyone is making it a point to hunt them down and take them out, or at least no sane person is doing that, which is very different from how alleged vampires were viewed and treated in ancient years. Specifically in Poland, archaeologists have found the remains of countless people that were deemed vampires by their communities. These people were often sought out and attacked with a stake to lessen their apparent threat they posed. Experts have dug out the remains and know this to be true due to the burial practices that were taken before the vampires were put in the ground. Firstly, they often left the stakes inside the chest or head of the victim. They would put heavy rocks and metals in their mouth so that if they came back to life, they would still at least be injured. They also set up traps, such as sharp objects firmly placed above their heads in the burial plot, to harm them if they tried to sit up. These discoveries weren't all that disturbing because of the vampire aspect. Instead, they were upsetting in the way that the Salem witch trials were. It seemed as though rumors and folklore tales got the best of some regions, and they grew suspicious of such things existing. So they found victims that they associated with the traits of a vampire and took their lives for no real reason. It's hard to determine whether or not these people should be considered evil because the lack of science and technology made it impossible to debunk these legends, and it's very possible that the residents of these regions feared for their safety and did what they had to do, or so they thought. Still, it's sad to know that so many lives were cut short for no good reason. Poland wasn't the only area to have such remains. Vampire burials have been found all over the world, originating from various points in human history. Many cultures see vampires the same way that we do today, with sharp fangs, an insatiable thirst, and an active nightlife. However, other features could also scare residents into deeming someone a vampire. One body found in Poland belonged to a young woman who had a physical deformity that caused a hump in her back. She was taken out in the same manner as a vampire, so it's likely that something about her appearance made others view her as one of the aforementioned monsters. Thankfully, today we don't have to worry about such things, or even real vampires. A team of expert archaeologists ventured into Scotland in an attempt to dig up the remains of the past in 2004. While studying an area and working to find something of importance, they struck symbolic gold by finding the remains of a young woman and a young man, believed to be a couple. The bodies and locations were documented in great detail, and then a closer study was performed to determine more information about their life and passing. It was confirmed that the bodies were about 3,000 years old. After being able to pinpoint a few details of their passing, experts realized that after they passed, they weren't immediately buried. In fact, they weren't buried in the location that they were still found in until 600 years after they lost their lives. They were first placed in a bog, a special body of water or wetland, where decomposed plant materials collect. Placing the remains in a bog will preserve and mummify them partially. Apparently, this was preferred for many years. After these two bodies served their time in the bog, they were fished out and transferred to what would become their final resting place, which was underground. But that's not even the weirdest part. During the investigation, the experts noticed something odd about the bodies. Many bones on each of them seemed out of place and were either too big, too small, or misplaced. A few years passed after the bodies were found, before DNA tests were finally performed on every bone. In a shocking revelation, it turned out that the bones belonged to at least 6 different people. It seemed at first that about 6 people passed at the same time and were taken apart before being randomly put back together. However, that theory was dismissed because the male body featured many bones that were actually several hundred years older than his own. Teams have been researching the puzzling situation for over a decade now, and don't seem to be any closer to an answer as to why this was done. An Acropolis in Athens was discovered by archaeologists who determined most of the remains belonged to highly respected members of the city. It was apparent due to the presentation of their burials that they proved great care was put into each plot. While studying and admiring the almost affectionately designed final resting places of these honored residents, the experts also found something less touching. A separate location featured a large burial plot, designed and attended to with just as much care and attention as the others. However, the remains inside were starkly different from those around them. The bodies of at least 80 young men were found buried together, connected by a string of shackles. Research proved that the men had been taken out in a disturbing manner, likely at the same time before being left behind. It's unclear who decided to treat their burial with such respect, but it's likely it wasn't the same person that made them face their fate. It's possible that they were soldiers or royal figures of high regard that either did something illegal or angered the wrong person. While the first assumption is that these men were slaves, it seems unlikely due to their burial conditions. Even if someone felt bad for them and buried them out of pity, such an act would not have been done alone and would have resulted in punishment for everyone and anyone that played a part. Sadly, their lives and their ends remain a mystery. The Publius Enigma internet mystery started on Pink Floyd's last tour together in 1994, when they featured songs from the albums The Division Bell, The Wall, and Dark Side of the Moon. A 194-foot-long airship named the Division Bell flew between concert venues, and a promo was released in which a spokesperson for the band stated, quote, "You've spotted the Pink Floyd airship. Do not be alarmed. Pink Floyd have sent their airship to North America to deliver a message. The Pink Floyd airship is headed towards a destination where all will be explained upon arrival. Pink Floyd will communicate." On the 11th of June that year, a message was posted to the alt.music.pinkfloyd Usenet news group that stated, quote, "My friends, you have heard the message Pink Floyd has delivered, but have you listened? Perhaps I can be your guide, but I will not solve the enigma for you. All of you must open your minds and communicate with each other, as this is the only way answers can be revealed. I may help you, but only if obstacles arrive. Listen, read, think, communicate. If I don't promise you the answers, would you go? Publius." A follow-up message explained that a unique prize awaited the person who would find the solution to a puzzle contained within the Division Bell album's lyrics, artwork, and music, accompanied by a further cryptic clue, which read, quote, "Monday, July 18th, East Rutherford, New Jersey, approximately 10:30 p.m., flashing white lights. There is an enigma, trust." On the 18th of July, as promised, lights on the front of the stage spelled out the word Enigma Publius. It would later be revealed that the band was not responsible for the mystery, but that it was an idea from their record company, EMI Records. Many fans speculated that the riddle was unsolvable, but drummer Nick Mason stated that the prize was something like a crop of trees planted in a forest clearing, or something similarly philanthropic. Despite the best efforts of many fans and groups of people to unravel the mystery, it was never solved and remains so to this day. On the 22nd of July, 2013, an unlicensed role-playing video game named Kanye Quest 3030, created by RPG Maker user Phoenix, was released. It was published with the description that it was a hip-hop themed science fiction 2D role-playing game. Gameplay starts off during the year 2010, with Kanye taking out his garbage, tripping, and falling into a portal which transports him to the year 3030. Upon reaching the other side, he realizes that the United States has become a dystopian society which is ruled by rapper Lil B, who proclaims himself to be a god. He learns of a prophecy which foretells that he would return to overthrow Lil B, and he travels throughout the dystopian society, teaming up with other musicians that include Jay-Z, Tupac, and RZA, who are there to help him on his quest. As they progress through the game, they face challenges from other musicians, such as Eminem, Nicki Minaj, De La Soul, and LL Cool J, who must all be defeated before West can proclaim himself to be a god and return to 2010, where he then finally puts his garbage away. In 2015, it was revealed in a Pastebin article that if a player were to type the word Ascend into an in-game console, they would be moved to a secret game section where they were told that the rest of the game was just a front and that this was the actual game. Here, players would enter a room with a QR code, which would redirect them to a dead IP logger site. Commands then needed to be inputted into various terminals before players were asked to provide personal details and told to wait to be contacted. Many people believed that the game was connected to a cult called Ascensionism, which is said to have been created at roughly the same time as the game's release, and that they were attempting to recruit members through the game. Some people also believe that the group has ties to record labels, such as Ascensionism Records, later named Ascend Records. The true purpose of the game, however, remains an unsolved internet mystery. In March of 2009, researchers at the Information Warfare Monitor discovered a large-scale cyber spying operation which they dubbed Ghostnet. It was found that it commanded and controlled infrastructure that was mainly based in China, and that it had compromised valuable political, media, and economic locations in 103 countries. This came after a 10-month investigation, which found that the office of the Dalai Lama may have been infiltrated, and his representative in Geneva was contacted. At first, investigators were focused on allegations that Chinese cyber espionage was being carried out against the Tibetan exile community, including the extraction of email correspondence. Targeted and compromised systems included those in India, South Korea, Indonesia, and German embassies, among others, as well as the foreign ministries of Latvia, Indonesia, Barbados, and Bangladesh, to name just a few. Government offices in the United States and UK were not targeted. However, the Washington, D.C.-based India Embassy's computers were compromised. These organizations were targeted via emails that contained contextually relevant information, but with attachments which included malicious software that communicated with the server located in China. This server then sent commands to the infected computer, causing it to download and install a Trojan named GhostRad, which hands over control of that computer to the attackers. The computer could then be inspected and controlled by an attacker who had the ability to record the computer's camera and audio software. Investigators from the Information Warfare Monitor stated that they could not say beyond a doubt that the Chinese government was responsible for the attack. However, researchers from Cambridge University stated that they believed the attack on the Dalai Lama's office to have originated from that government. Researchers did not exclude the possibility that Ghostnet was being run by private Chinese citizens who were out to make a profit, or were carrying out the attacks in the name of patriotism. They also didn't rule out that it may have been created by intelligence agencies from Russia or the United States. They did state, however, that when Ghostnet is detected, it's been found to be controlled by an IP address located in the Hainan Island, where the Lingshui Signals Intelligence Facility and 3rd Technical Department of the People's Liberation Army are located. It was also later revealed that one of the 4 control servers used by Ghostnet belongs to the Chinese government, though no one has been able to prove exactly where the attacks originated from, and it remains an unsolved mystery. The Blank Room Soup video was originally uploaded to YouTube in 2005 under the title Freaky Soup Guy, and since it gained traction years later, its purpose and origin have been speculated over by internet sleuths who still haven't been able to crack this unsolvable internet mystery. The minute-long video features a man in a white tank top, his eyes blacked out by a sensor bar, eating what looks like soup from a bowl with an oversized wooden spoon. Someone wearing a costume with a blank face and black hair then approaches from a door behind the man and starts to gently pat him on the back while he eats. The man can be heard crying as another identical figure emerges from the right of the screen, who then also starts to pat the man on his back. This carries on for a short while before the video abruptly ends, giving us no clue as to who the man is or why he and the characters are there. Some people speculated that the man was being held against his will and forced to eat something questionable, while others theorized that it's just a video that was made to creep people out. It would later be discovered that the 2 characters were the creation of Raymond S. Percy, who's worked on 5 episodes of the series The Twisted Adventures of Felix the Cat, before working as a character layout artist on The Simpsons. The 2 characters are collectively known as Ray Ray, and the costumes were created between 1998 and 2002, allowing them to appear in their own skits and on stage on various platforms, including the Ray Ray Vision YouTube channel, and the Ray Rayville MySpace page and Ray Ray World domain, among others. It would later be discovered that the two Ray Ray suits seen in the Blank Soup video were stolen from Percy after a performance at a club on Hollywood's Sunset Strip in the early 2000s, and they were never recovered. The video was sent to him in an email, and he uploaded it to YouTube with the description, quote, "We don't know what this is," and he claimed it was shared with his group, presumably the crew that he was working with at the time. He also noted that the characters moved exactly as he intended them to, suggesting that the people in the video were familiar with Ray Ray. No one has been able to identify the creator of this video, the people in the Ray Ray suits, or the man eating soup, and it remains an internet mystery that may never be solved. Marianas Web is alleged to be the deepest place on the internet, deeper than the dark web, and hence it's named after the Mariana Trench, which is the deepest oceanic trench on Earth. It's speculated that it holds secrets belonging to the most powerful governments in the world, and that secret archival information on the Vatican, as well as the location of the lost city of Atlantis, can be found here. Some people claim that it houses an incredibly powerful AI that controls the internet, and that only quantum computers have the capability of accessing. Its impenetrability can be attributed to two factors. It's said that users need to have knowledge of an extremely complicated algorithm that's needed to access the network. Secondly, this algorithm can only be calculated with the use of quantum computers, which some believe are owned by the most powerful governments in the world. Others have speculated that the Marianas Web is, in fact, the powerful AI itself, and that it is incredibly dangerous due to the fact that it has access to so much information. Other theories suggest that it was created to distract from dark web black market takedowns. This disinformation campaign is supposedly the creation of hackers who were blackmailed by the FBI into spreading rumors of the Marianas Web's existence. In 2015, the existence of quantum computers was confirmed in a partnership formed between NASA, Google, and the Universal Space Station Research Association. These computers can, however, only run in an environment where a vacuum with pressure 10 billion times lower than that of the Earth's is present. The vacuum also needs to be at a temperature of 0.015 degrees above absolute zero. There are also those who speculate that this part of the internet is guarded by closed-shell systems, meaning that it would be accessible by invitation only. Each member would be evaluated beforehand, making it completely private and virtually insusceptible to attacks and intrusions. Though many more theories abound on whether the Marianas Web actually exist, no one has ever been able to unequivocally prove any of the theories that have been posited, and the mystery surrounding it remains a creepy internet mystery. The build-up to the Napoleonic Wars was the perfect time for an attempt on the life of a British diplomat traveling through Europe. At least that was the opinion of Benjamin Bathurst, the diplomat in question who was certain someone was coming to attack him. On the night of November 25th, 1809, Bathurst's worst fears came true, as he vanished without a trace in Brandenburg while on his way back to Britain. Everything from the paranormal to his own paranoia has been blamed for his disappearance, but the truth will likely never be uncovered. Bathurst was a relatively wealthy man, related to the British Foreign Secretary, and married to the daughter of Baronet. In the early 1800s, he was a minor diplomat, and in 1809, he was sent to meet the Austrian Emperor. The aim of the mission was to strengthen ties with the country and to convince the Emperor to declare war on France. Bathurst was sent despite the fact he didn't speak German and didn't have much experience in the role. The trip to Austria went without a problem, though Bathurst seemed concerned the entire journey that someone was out to get him. He refused to let his carriage driver help a woman at the side of the road, fearing that it was an ambush. When one of the people he was traveling with told him he was being paranoid, he accused the man of being part of a conspiracy to kill him. While it was a dangerous time in Europe, there was little evidence anybody was after Bathurst. The paranoia didn't impact Bathurst's ability to do the job, and he succeeded in convincing Austria to declare war. Unfortunately for Austria, the war didn't go as planned and Bathurst was recalled to London. He and his attendant traveled with assumed names north through Prussia. On the night of November 25th, they arrived in Perlberg, a town near Berlin. They requested a carriage to be arranged and spent the evening at a local inn. Bathurst spent most of the night in his room, writing a number of letters and burning many in the room's fireplace. When it came time to leave, he and his attendant went to the carriage together. Bathurst disappeared out of his attendant's sight as he went around to the other side of the carriage. When his attendant followed him there, he was nowhere to be seen. Bathurst's attendant and the carriage driver searched the local area. It took a while for authorities to get involved, but when they did, they searched the river and the surrounding woodland, but found no sign of him. Eventually, a few items of his clothing were found, including trousers with bullet holes, though there was no blood. It was suspected he'd been robbed for his clothes and left to perish, though nobody was ever found. The disappearance of First Lieutenant Felix Moncla and Second Lieutenant Robert Wilson is one of the most infamous aircraft-related mysteries in history. The two Air Force personnel were investigating an unidentified flying object over Lake Superior when their jet disappeared from the radar. No wreckage was ever recovered, and a satisfying explanation has never been given. The UFO was spotted on radar in the early evening of November 23, 1953. It was dangerously close to the US-Canadian border and not far from the Kinross Air Force Base. At 6:22 p.m., a high-spec jet was sent to investigate. Moncla was an experienced man with hundreds of flight hours and more than 120 in crafts similar to the one he was piloting that night. Wilson would have been on radar duties. Though the craft they were chasing was a UFO, it's important to know that doesn't necessarily mean it was anything paranormal or extraterrestrial. It was simply an aircraft that hadn't been identified and wasn't supposed to be there. But it was important to figure out what it was and make sure it didn't interfere with any activities going on over the lakes. Things became odd when Wilson struggled to track the object with the onboard radar. Apparently, it kept changing course. Instead, ground control had to direct the jet with their own radar. The object was incredibly fast, and Moncla chased it for over half an hour, though didn't appear to ever give a description of what he was seeing in the air, if he saw anything at all. Eventually, radar showed the Air Force jet had caught up with the UFO. The blips representing the two aircraft had merged, then the radar return for the Air Force craft dropped off the scope. The UFO continued for a while longer, indicating ground control's radar device was still working before it too vanished. The US Air Force and Coast Guard and their Canadian counterparts all searched the lake for any sign of the missing airmen, but came up empty-handed. At first, this was the story given by the Air Force to the press, but speculation about UFOs and aliens meant they soon retracted the statement. Now it was a Canadian plane that had stayed off course. Moncla and Wilson had successfully identified the plane before Moncla was stricken with vertigo and crashed the plane. Given the depths of Lake Superior, the plane couldn't be retrieved. While this was definitely a more plausible explanation, the Canadian Air Force denied any such plane had been in the area, and information about the incident had been scrubbed from the record. It seems likely Moncla and Wilson met something above Lake Superior, possibly an experimental aircraft owned by the US itself, but until a wreckage site is discovered, the UFO speculation will continue. Victor Grayson was a socialist politician and a journalist who disappeared in 1920 after threatening to expose a politician who was selling honors. Grayson's political career left him with few friends, and it was months before he was reported missing. It was widely assumed that he'd been murdered for getting too close to uncovering the secrets of powerful people, though people who knew him before he became famous claimed he'd been paid off and was now living a quiet life as a shop owner. Grayson became interested in politics while at university. He was studying for a career in religion, but came to the conclusion that the only way he could make lives better was through politics. He was a radical thinker at the time, campaigning for women's rights to vote and for more power to the workers. He ran in a by-election in 1907, but wasn't supported by the Independent Labour Party, which he was a part of. The party had an agreement with another left-wing party not to run against one another, so as not to split the votes, but Grayson ran anyway and won. While a member of the parliament, He made many speeches condemning the government for abandoning the working class people, and even turned his anger against fellow left-wing politicians for being traitors. He wanted a revolution, while left-wing parties at the time wanted to make a difference from inside the system. He failed to get re-elected, on part due to alcohol problems, and spent many years giving pro-socialist speeches before the First World War. Unlike many socialists at the time, he was for the war and served in the New Zealand military because he believed the British Empire was the best way to spread his socialist ideals. After the war, he tried to restart his political career in the UK with little success, and turned his attention to Ireland. But at this point, there were numerous rumors about him, including that he was being paid by MI5. He started working as a journalist and accused the British Prime Minister of being part of a scheme to sell honors such as knighthoods. The main person behind the plot he would not name, but threatened to if nothing changed. Shortly after his accusation, he was beaten up while walking in London. He wasn't too badly injured, and it appeared to simply be an attempt to scare him. The attempt didn't work, and he continued to make his accusations. On September 28, 1920, he was out drinking with friends when he received a telephone message. He told them he would be back shortly and then disappeared. Later that afternoon, a painter working on the riverbank noticed Grayson, accompanied by two men, walk into a house later discovered to be owned by Arthur Gregory, the man Grayson believed was selling peerages. This was the last time Grayson was confirmed to have been seen, though decades later an old friend would claim to have found Grayson running a shop. He'd allegedly wanted to step away from the public life and had been given a chance to start again. Cicar Abovian was one of the most important figures in the history of Armenian literature. He lived and worked at a turbulent time in Eastern Europe, and his belief in an Armenian national state meant his disappearance in 1848 became linked to numerous political groups. Cicar was a well-educated young man, earning a Russian state scholarship and teaching at a school. He wrote about the struggles of the Armenian people during the Russia-Persian War, using the common Armenian dialect rather than the classical language, which was popular with most scholars. Cicar's writing was closely linked to his politics, and his politics were very closely linked to his education in Russia. Armenia was at the time split between the Russian and Ottoman empires, a split that only became more permanent during the Russia-Persian War. Cicar believed Russia would help the country to become an independent nation, and felt deeply betrayed when Russia came down hard on the Armenians living in its empire. In the late 1930s, Cicar married a woman named Emilia of German and Estonian descent. Together they had two children, a son and a daughter, who he was very close to. His children were 8 and 5 years old when, on April 2, 1948, their father left his home for an early morning walk, but he would never come back. Despite later Russian governments making Cicar an important historical figure, few details are known about the nature of his disappearance. His wife didn't even report him missing until a month after he had vanished. By that point, there was no trace of him and no evidence at his home, which might have hinted at what happened to him. Some suggest Cicar staged his own disappearance or even commit suicide, though his family at the time didn't believe he would abandon his children. Historians have suggested that he may have been forcibly exiled to Siberia, something which happened to a number of people living in the area at the time. Other possibilities include leaving to take part in the European revolutions or being killed by Turkish debtors. Socialite and an aspiring writer who disappeared in New York in December of 1910. It wasn't until the following year that her family, fearful of publicity, finally got the police involved. By that point, it was too late to locate the missing 25-year-old. Despite her wealth, Dorothy was going through a number of problems at the time of her disappearance. She lived with her parents, who ridiculed her dream of becoming a writer. This wouldn't have been too bad were it not for the multiple rejection letters she received from magazines she sent her short stories to. Her parents were also disapproving of her boyfriend, a man named George Grissom. He also came from wealthy parents, but he was almost 20 years older than Dorothy and didn't hold down a job. Dorothy's father, Francis, believed his daughter should be with someone who had to work to occupy his mind. Dorothy's mother, Mary, was also ill at the time of her disappearance. Despite only recently receiving a rejection letter from a popular magazine, Dorothy seemed upbeat and cheerful in early December of 1910. On December 12th, she told her mother she was going out to buy a dress for her sister's party. Mary offered to go with her, but Dorothy told her she would call if she found one that was suitable. Dorothy made a number of stops on her trip, purchasing a box of chocolates and a book. At 2 p.m., she bumped into a friend, who she told she was going to walk through Central Park before returning home. This was the last confirmed sighting of Dorothy. Her family grew concerned when she didn't show up for dinner and called around to Dorothy's friends to see if she'd stopped with any of them, but she hadn't. Later that evening, one of her friends called back, checking to see if Dorothy had returned yet. Mary said that she had, but she had a headache so she couldn't come to the phone. It would turn out this was a lie. The following day, the family called a friend who was a lawyer to look into the case. Searching her room, they came up with no answers. Her father suspected George, who was in Italy at the time, had something to do with her disappearance, but he claimed to have no idea where Dorothy was. Finally, in January of 1911, the family got the police involved, and a reward of $1,000 was offered for Dorothy's safe return. Police received countless fake leads, and the Arnolds were sent 2 ransom notes, though these 2 turned out to be fake. By February, it appeared the Arnolds had given up the search for their daughter, believing she was dead, though no evidence was ever found. A few years later, an illegal abortion clinic was uncovered, and one of the doctors claimed to have accidentally killed Dorothy in an abortion gone wrong. This, however, seemed unlikely, as Dorothy didn't suspect she was pregnant at the time. Another criminal claimed to have killed Dorothy on the orders of a rich man and buried her in the basement of a house. Again, there was no evidence to say if this was the case. Çatalhöyük holds the record as being the world's oldest town, located in modern-day Turkey. The civilization first sprung up around 6500 BC. While it's not as big as some of the civilizations on our list, Çatalhöyük was home to 6,000 people who lived in simple mud brick houses. These houses were very basic and featured no doors, no windows, no glass, and were accessed by a hatch in the roof. Moreover, to walk between houses and businesses, residents would have to walk on the roofs, which acted like streets and footpaths. Due to the houses being so close together, the community was extremely tight-knit and relied on each other for food and trade. They decorated their walls with murals and paintings of people, animals, and possibly religious figures. They even buried their dead inside of their houses underneath the floors to ensure that their relatives would remain close to them even in death. The people of Çatalhöyük depended on hunting and farming for their survival, mainly growing wheat and barley and keeping livestock such as sheep and cows, and hunting down wild animals for pelts and a surplus of food. The city was doing very well, and residents were self-sufficient, with everyone having access to food, water, and beautiful clothing and jewelry. And around 5000 BC though, Çatalhöyük was suddenly abandoned and no one knows why. No one even knew the site existed until 1958, when archaeologist James Mellert, who worked with Cambridge University, rediscovered it. Ever since then, teams of experts have been working to crack the mystery. Many think that climate change or adverse weather patterns could have caused its abandonment. Others suspect invasion, but either way, we have no proof to back up either of these, and these remain simply as theories. Located in what we know now as modern-day St. Louis, Missouri, Cahokia people settled there around 1200 years ago, springing from indigenous tribes in Mexico. They chose this settlement as the American Southeast and Midwest provided them with arable fertile lands to grow their corn. Sometime around 1100 AD, Cahokia saw a boom in population and quickly became the largest Mesoamerican city that was outside of Mexico. Before this time, Cahokia had a very small population of around 2,000 people, but the boom saw it increase to an estimated 40,000. If that estimate is correct, it makes it more populated than London and England at that time. But the paradise of Cahokia wasn't to last, and by 1200 AD, the civilization saw a rapid decline. The main problems faced by the people was keeping an adequate flow of food and managing water supplies. Due to sheer volume of people that lived there, the water supplies soon became polluted with waste and made many citizens very ill. Many historians have disputed the reason why the Cahokian settlement was abandoned. Speculation does point towards invasion. However, this settlement was created 1,000 years before Europeans first landed on the Americas, so historians turn to other possibilities. One of these is that the Cahokians inadvertently caused their own demise by overhunting, overfishing, and taking too many resources from the land without replenishing them. Another theory was that devastating weather patterns, such as floods and even possible ice ages, made the Cahokians abandon their home. Disease also plays a factor in this, as Cahokia was a hub of trading activity, and it saw a lot of footfall from people all around the world, especially from the US and Mexico, thus increasing the possibility of new diseases being introduced. Today, the area is known as the Cahokia Mounds State Historic Site and is listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, one of only 21 in the US. It also stakes the claim as the largest archaeological site in the world, spanning over 2,200 acres. Eric the Red from Iceland set out on an expedition in the 10th century to conquer new lands, as the Vikings are so famously known for doing. Within the voyage, 3 groups subsequently branched off into 3 different settlements: Eastern, Western, and Middle. These Vikings relied on livestock and hunting as well as trade to sustain their lifestyle. They even exported walrus ivory, which was in large demand in Central Europe. These trading abilities really set the Vikings apart on the world stage. They'd conquered a lot of different countries in Europe, cementing their influence on European culture for centuries to come. The Vikings of Greenland had established a great settlement for themselves in Greenland, and despite the harsh weather conditions, their small villages were thriving, and it seemed like this would be sustainable for many years to come. That was until all of these colonies simply dropped off the face of the earth. Archaeologists estimate that it happened sometime between 1360 and 1460, but 100 years is a large discrepancy in time, and it's possible that this estimate isn't even close to the truth. Like with the Cahokia people, many experts believe that the Little Ice Age was responsible for the demise of the Vikings in Greenland. When the settlements first established, the weather was good and spurred on Eric the Red to take action, but as time passed, weather patterns changed, and extreme cold weather set in. It's been suggested that the extreme cold could have either killed the settlers, as they were nowhere near as prepared as the native Greenlanders for such weather, or that Eric the Red rallied his Vikings and ran back to his native Iceland as fast as he could, both of which are completely possible. Experts do offer up other ideas, however, and they speculate that, like many civilizations on the list, they overfarmed and overfished the lands until it was uninhabitable. Without land, a source of food and trade, the Vikings would have been forced back to their native lands in order to preserve their numbers. At the time of the Greenland Vikings disappearing, the Black Death was also making its way across Europe, causing widespread devastation. The Black Death claimed 50 million victims within the 14th century, which was 60% of Europe's entire population. It's also been offered up that the native people of Greenland fought against the Viking invasion, and although at first they weren't successful, in the end, clashes between the 2 groups caused the Vikings to leave. Due to the fact that there isn't one solid explanation as to why the Vikings of Greenland disappeared, we can only speculate that an amalgamation of reasons is behind their departure. Across the American Southwest, the Anasazi prevailed as strong settlers with large cities that were being built underneath overhanging cliffs to protect them from the elements. Unlike many civilizations mentioned on this list, the Anasazi actively took weather into account and built their society accordingly, giving them the best chance of survival. The word Anasazi in context refers to ancient ones or ancient outsiders. The word in Navajo means ancient enemies, which is where their name most likely came from. Despite being seen as outsiders or enemies, the Anasazi thrived and lived off the lands. They took advantage of the low rainfall and grew lots of high-yield crops, meaning they would have a surplus of food year-round. Despite clearly thriving in their settlement, the Anasazi were to be no more by the end of the 13th century, when they disappeared off the face of the earth. Archaeologists don't know what happened specifically, but they do know that something cataclysmic happened to force the Anasazi out. It's one of the greatest mysteries faced by modern-day archaeologists, with no physical documents existing, and they rely on the oral history of their ancestors, which remain closely guarded secrets, even until this day. Speculation from experts states that the demise of the Anasazi people most likely came from a violent event, possibly a war within the civilization itself. There are even talks of cannibalism and horrendous crimes against humanity, but we're still no closer to understanding why any of this happened. Perhaps tensions with the Navajo or other native tribes boiled over and caused a war, or the Anasazis were fighting amongst themselves in a power struggle. It seemed that we might never know the truth as to why the Anasazi civilization simply disappeared. The Olmec lived in what is now modern-day Mexico in the states of Tabasco and Veracruz. The name Olmec is an Aztec word meaning the rubber people. They were so named as they traded rubber throughout Mexico and America. They're one of the first major civilizations to appear in Mexico, and were around from 1600 BCE to 350 BCE. As their name suggests, they harnessed the rubber tree, and from that converted the latex into a product that could be used. The Olmecs are even credited with creating the Mesoamerican ball game that was played using solid balls of rubber. They also carved large stone heads as tributes to their gods, leaders, and deities, and are seen as a major influence on the Mesoamerican civilizations that came after them, such as the Maya and Incas. Like the civilizations that came after them, the Olmecs were master traders and used a lot of jade, obsidian, volcanic rock, and rubber to set them apart from others on the world stage. Due to their large successes in trading, the Olmecs were able to build large urban hubs which played host to ceremonies and activities for the higher-ups within society. So what went wrong for the mighty Olmecs? They had a large civilization that spanned over many years and seemed to be technically advanced and built a very nice society for themselves. One theory suggests that over time, the rivers they relied on for water became silted up due to the population and overused them, thus causing a mass water shortage, which in the end posed tragedy for the Olmecs. The other theory is that the volcanic activity in the area caused the Olmecs to either move somewhere else or face being wiped out. Since there's little to no documented history about the Olmec people, it's hard to get to the bottom of what really happened to them. In an era where apps and basic Google searches can identify pretty much any piece of content ever created, it's eerie that a piece of music recorded as recently as the 1980s remains completely unknown. The so-called most mysterious song on the internet sounds like a typical 80s electronic pop song with slurred lyrics that can't be properly made out. The only thing that makes it stand out is that nobody knows who sang it, what it's called, or even when it was released. The song was uploaded to 2 sites dedicated to 80s synth pop and identifying obscure music in 2007 by a German woman called Lydia. Lydia's brother had recorded the song from a German public radio in 1984. Like many teenagers at the time, he would record the radio on a cassette deck. Among those captured were well-known hits at the time, as well as pieces of music he didn't know the background to, but liked the way they sounded. The mysterious song was one such song. He'd not heard the announcement before or after the song that would have named the artist, and couldn't even name it himself. Once Lydia released the song, it was picked up by various music fans and internet sleuths. Thousands of people have heard the song, but have been unable to come up with any answers. Even the radio DJ who played the song back in the 80s doesn't seem to be any help. When approached by Rolling Stones magazine, he said he didn't remember ever playing it. While he admitted he could have stored it away in one of the thousands of records he'd collected over the years, he had no memory of it. There have been thousands of false leads, and underground Eastern European bands from the era have been suggested, but nobody has come forward with a definitive answer. The Maravian Parallax Denegret mystery is often called the internet's oldest mystery, and for a good reason. Long before any random string of words posted in forums was brushed up as another alternate reality game, an unknown user posted strange messages into otherwise ordinary conversations on early internet boards. The mystery began in August of 1996 when hundreds of messages with the subject line of Maravian Parallax Denegret were posted in discussions about a variety of completely unrelated topics across Usenet, an early precursor to modern internet forums. The body of these messages were simply a random jumble of words and names. Unfortunately, due to the age of the mystery, most of the messages weren't archived, and only one remains today. Of course, this message made absolutely no sense, and many brushed it off as a bot. Even in the early days of the internet, there were computer programs that could automatically generate nonsensical messages like this. The programs used something called a Markov chain, a mathematical process that provides coding directives. People assumed Markovian referred to the Markov chain, and guessed the messages were some proof of concept or a prototype of a new type of chatbot. However, others thought there was more to these messages than meets the eye. The random string of words does somewhat resemble a Cold War number station, and it was hypothesized that the messages could be sending secret codes to spies. The Maravian Parallax Denegret messages stopped almost as soon as they had started, and there was very little to go on, so the internet soon forgot about them. However, stories about the posts resurfaced about a decade later, and the email address attached to the only post to have survived raised eyebrows. The address belonged to Susan Lindor. a controversial alleged spy who was apparently in contact with the CIA at the time of the postings and believed she knew the truth behind the Pan Am Flight 103 bombing of 1988. Lindor denied sending the messages, but her connection to the post gives conspiracy theorists another reason to believe it's more than a random jumble of words. As we no longer have the other messages, it's impossible to know if there really was anything more to this, unless the perpetrator does decide to come forward after all these years to give an explanation. 4 years ago, an anonymous user posted to a few conspiracy and technology subreddits, asking why there would be 25 to 30 identical Wi-Fi networks originating from a seemingly ordinary slab of the ground. The user was posting from Honolulu, Hawaii, where he was working as a building contractor for a distillery company. According to the user, he'd done testing with a Wi-Fi analyzer to determine the exact spot where the strange Wi-Fi signals were originating. All the networks were relatively low strength, but any changes in them were coordinated. A heat-sensing camera determined the spot the Wi-Fi was coming from was 30 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than the surrounding areas. A few Redditors commented to ask if he could connect to any of the networks, and about any possible power sources. The poster described changes to the area that had been done by the company he was working for, and said that he had since moved away. He also linked to a random eBay account, which he claimed was being run by his boss. It sold allegedly faulty electronics, and is believed to have been a front for criminal activity. It later emerged that the Redditor was actually a man named Michael McSorley, who had worked for Island Distillers as a contractor for a few months. His boss's name was Dave Flintstone. According to Dave, he had no connection to the eBay account McSorley was posting about, and didn't know why his former worker had made the link. McSorley had started acting strangely after a few months in Honolulu. Around the same time, he became friends with a drug addict. Not long after, he disappeared, and a few weeks later, his father came to pick up his things. It's likely McSorley was suffering from paranoia, possibly due to substance abuse, which would explain his abrupt departure from Hawaii. However, it seems like an odd thing to make up, especially given the amount of detail he went into concerning the characteristics of the Wi-Fi signals. If the signals did exist, what exactly they were for has never been properly explained. We often think of things like cyberstalking as being a modern phenomenon, but it's actually been a problem for many internet users for decades. One such early victim was a technical writer, Cynthia Armistead. Cynthia's ordeal began in 1996 when another internet user commenting on a news board dedicated to the Atlanta area began to send her harassing messages. Despite trying to get help from the email host, Cynthia and her daughter continued to get threatening emails from the user for over a week before he told her the emails had been sent by his adult son and son-in-law, and that he was punishing them but didn't think he should be held responsible. Of course, the ordeal didn't end there, and within days, she began to receive sexually explicit emails from men who believed she was a prostitute. The emails to both her own address and that of her young daughter continued for years, but it didn't take Cynthia long to figure out where they were coming from. Someone had posted prostitution advertisements in various online spaces, urging people to contact Cynthia if they were looking for a good time, and it seemed many people were keen to take up the offer. Whenever one was taken down, another advert would pop up, both in sex-related news groups and in forums that Cynthia would frequent. It reached a point where Cynthia was no longer able to engage in online discussions without fear that someone would twist what she said and use it in another advert. The harassment didn't stay online, as Cynthia would receive threatening phone calls and emails would describe information about her real-world life, including comments about her daughter's school attendance. Over the decades, Cynthia and her family had to move to multiple houses multiple times, and she lost count of the number of times she had to change her phone number. The stalker always seemed to be able to obtain Cynthia's new number, and it wasn't until 2005 that the in-person stalking stopped. Despite the anonymity of the internet, Cynthia is certain she knows who's behind her stalking. Using her technology knowledge, she was able to determine the initial harassment had come from an IP address belonging to a man named Richard Hilliard. It was Hilliard who claimed it was his son who was responsible, but Cynthia and those who knew Hilliard in real life didn't believe the claim, and the continued harassment came from IP addresses that were all linked to him. Cynthia was able to take Hilliard to court on stalking and harassment charges, but he was cleared due to a lack of evidence, and the case officially remains unsolved. She now hosts a site about her ordeal and is dedicated to helping others who find themselves victims of cyberstalking. In June of 2011, 32-year-old Jack Ferres passed away. The death was very sudden and was caused by arrhythmia. Almost 6 months later, a childhood friend received an email from Jack's email address. It's not unheard of for technical problems resulting in emails or messages being repeatedly sent months or even years after the initial message, but the email received by Tim Hart was completely original, not one that Jack had sent while he was still alive. The short message had the subject line, "I'm watching," with the body reading, "Did you hear me? I'm at your house. Clean your attic." The comment referenced a conversation Jack and Tim had shortly before his death. According to Tim, Jack hadn't been impressed at the state of his attic and suggested he clean it. As they were alone at the time, it's unlikely anybody but Tim and Jack knew about the joke. The email scared Tim, who didn't believe anybody but Jack could have sent the message. He responded to the email, but didn't receive any response. According to his friends and family, Jack hadn't shared his passwords with anybody. Even if they had known about the conversation about Tim's attic, they wouldn't have been able to send the email. Of course, it's possible the email had been sent before Jack's passing and had been delayed for some reason. However, Tim wasn't the only person to receive an email from beyond the grave. Jack's cousin, Jimmy McGraw, also received an email sent months after Jack passed away. It read, "How are you doing? I knew you were going to break your ankle. I tried to warn you. Gotta be careful. Tell Rock for me. Great song, huh? You're welcome." Couldn't get through to him. His email address didn't work. This time, the email couldn't have been prepared before Jack's death, as Jimmy hadn't even broken his ankle until weeks after his cousin's funeral. The second part of the message referred to another cousin named Frank with the nickname Rock. According to Frank, he'd been writing a song for Jack months after his passing, but struggled with the ending. Jack apparently visited him in a dream and helped Frank finish the song. This was apparently what the message referred to. This could be a cruel prank, or worse, Jack's family trying to jump on the publicity of the initial attic email, but his family are taking the messages as a sign that their loved one is still out there looking for them. Carol Turner, a postgraduate student at the University of New Mexico, was a hiking enthusiast. She was equally fond of fauna and flora and was a lover of the great outdoors. The last time she was ever seen was during a visit to the Organ Pipe Cactus National Park Monument on January 31st, 1971. This national monument is located in southern Arizona, where it borders Sonora, a Mexican state. The reserve is 517 square miles and is home to organ pipe cactuses as well as other desert flora. Unsurprisingly, it appealed greatly to Carol. On either the 1st or 2nd of February, she left the main visitor campground where she'd been staying and hiked up to Bull Pasture in the Ajo Mountains. The Bull Pasture Trail is known for having the best views of the entire monument. Hikers who reach the Bull Pasture have the option of continuing onward to Mount Ajo, which is a difficult day-long hike. On the 3rd, Carol left her car in the Bull Pasture Trail parking lot. There was a note on the windshield stating that if the car was still there on the 4th, a park ranger would be contacted immediately, as she only intended to hike for a day. But the last time she was ever seen would be on the 3rd. Oddly enough, she had left notes on the trail. One was friendly, saying, "Hi, I have binoculars. Look for a white shirt or yellow windbreaker across the way and say hello." However, there was another note that was paraphrased by witnesses as saying, "I brought a beer, where are you?" The search that followed her disappearance set the record for the largest search ever conducted at the monuments. Over 134 people, including tribal authorities and state agencies, were involved in a search totaling 3,600 hours. Specialist rock climbers were employed and aircraft hovered over the tricky terrain in search for her. But it was all for nothing. Over a week after Carol's disappearance, a park ranger caught the smell that he recognized as that of a decaying body. The search continued in this area until the smell, which was strong at first, started to fade. Regardless, it was quite strange that cadaver dogs could not pick up on the scent as strong as it was and find Carol. Carol was never found. A chief ranger at Oregon Pipe has stated that she may have injured herself or fallen off the cliff. He added that February 3rd was a cold, blustery day, and to get out of the bad weather, she crawled into one of the hundreds of tiny caves that line the cliffs. Dense brush grew right up against the cave entrance, and there she most likely died. The brush has hidden the grave from the searchers, and so far they haven't found her. Cayman Welch, better known as Kay, was an experienced outdoorsman and was helping his uncle do some AC work at the Tortilla Flat the day that he disappeared. On the way back home, they stopped at Weaver's Needle Vista right off of State Route 88 in the Tonto National Forest in Arizona. Kay said that he wanted to get a good view of the sunset. The last time that he would be seen, he was walking from the parking area to the viewpoint. The Tonto National Forest is the largest national forest in Arizona. It's well known for its diverse sceneries. Cayman was dressed in a Ghostbusters t-shirt, black jeans, and army boots when he disappeared. So volunteers and friends who searched for him looked out for his clothes to no avail. No body was found either. Despite the use of tracker dogs, horseback riders, drones, and helicopters with infrared cameras, the search did not turn up anything at all. Volunteers and friends thought he may have gone off route and ventured into deeper, more unfamiliar territory after mistaking another rock formation for Weaver's Needle. He was known to be dealing with depression, and the thought that he intended to disappear and never return was entertained. Why else would someone set out without any food or water? The 2 months following his disappearance were filled with such questions. Shortly after his disappearance, his family suffered another tragic blow after his little brother passed away. Trevor Brazil was a 43-year-old art teacher living in Panaca, Nevada. He was passionate about rock collecting and often made trips into the hills south of town. Sometimes his adventures would last throughout the night. He disappeared on August 14, 2020 during such a trip. Soon after he was reported missing, his rock bucket was discovered, but not the man himself. His vehicle was found approximately 15 miles south of Panaca. It was parked near Miller Wash, deep within the hills. The search effort involved over 100 volunteers and was led by an officer from the sheriff's office. They traced a scent for 7 miles, which brought them to his rock-filled bucket and a towel. The first day of searching ended in disappointment despite this breakthrough. The search intensified the next day. There was more air support, and horses, ATVs, and dirt bikes were also used. However, to the dismay of the searchers, the dogs were finding it difficult to hold on to the scent. On top of this, the search had been thorough, and it seemed that there was nothing more that could be done. The Nevada Department of Forestry sent out help on the 3rd day of the search, but the day ended in disappointment once again. The question on everyone's mind was what could have happened to Trevor. Law enforcement has speculated that he might have wandered off in a delirious state, or worse, he might have wandered off into the path of a mountain lion. However, there's very little evidence to back up such theories. In October, his wife thanked the community for supporting her family through the difficult period in their lives. Ali Naderi, a 52-year-old hiker, was last seen at the foot of Eagle Mountain, also known as Eagle Ridge, a well-known destination for hiking, mountain biking, and ATV riding. Police stated that this was a case of a hiker who was simply unprepared for the conditions and somehow got lost. Nearby trail and off-trail locations were searched by around 40 to 60 volunteers. The search continued as more volunteers joined in, racking a total of 2,400 hours searching with the aid of GPS, helicopters, drones, and search dogs. Police stated that they were covering so much terrain that they were entering riskier terrain without knowing whether they were searching in the right direction. The disappearance was difficult to comprehend, as Ali was familiar with the mountain range. He had even hiked it numerous times with minimal supplies. So did he simply get lost, or did he come across a wild animal? Some have speculated that he got injured, which made it difficult for him to return. During the search, an image was obtained from a motion-activated trail camera, which allowed the search parties to focus their search, and yet no significant breakthroughs were made. After a little over a week, the search was suspended. Authorities said that if evidence resurfaces that will aid in the search, they will resume. Michael Fisseri was a passionate hiker and backpacker. Even at 51 years of age, he enjoyed going on long hikes. On the 15th of June 2005, he embarked on such a hike, starting from the north side of Hetch Hetchy Reservoir in Yosemite National Park. During this hike, he steered away from his initial planned route and made his way towards Till Mountain. He was never seen again. Michael's family described him as an off-the-grid kind of guy. He also had a photographic memory. He'd been to Hetch Hetchy numerous times and was familiar with the area. So when he didn't return home by the 19th of June, his family became worried, and 2 days later they called the park service. Michael's car was still in the parking area. A search began with many believing that he had injured himself. In fact, he had recently broken his ankle. They found a backpack near Till Mountain. It was off of the trail, and it troubled his friends and family as he was not the type of guy to leave his backpack and go wandering off. The search party increased with the employment of aircraft and tracker dogs. Even Marines took part in the search, but sadly, the tracker dogs did not pick up a scent, plus there were no tracks to follow. In total, Yosemite Park spent $452,000 searching for Mike. Mike's disappearance remains a cold case. It's believed that he may have slipped into the river below the point where his backpack was discovered. At the same time, he could have encountered illegal drug operations, which have led to a swift disappearance as well. Nobody really knows what happened to Michael. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.